Good afternoon, everybody. And oh, I got some echo going on here. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Humanities Cafe. My name is Stacy. I'm excited that you're here. I'm with the South Dakota Humanities Council, the program coordinator here, and have been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. So, if you were able to join us at our last cafe discussion, we were fortunate to be joined by constitutional scholar David Adler. And a big part of that discussion involved the importance of having a well-informed citizenry. As Thomas Jefferson stated, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. So what does being well-informed entail? Well, it involves a citizenry that's able to make informed decisions, participate actively in their community and government, identify and address social problems, and combat misinformation. Trust in America's institutions has been declining significantly for several decades, but most noticeably in recent years. So when people lose trust in those institutions, they lose trust in the stories told by those institutions. And one of those institutions is unfortunately the media. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of informational literacy and media literacy as a means by which we can better understand our society and also maybe begin to regain our trust in America's institutions, beginning with a revived trust in the media. And joining me today are two phenomenal experts in the field of media and information literacy. We have Carson Walker and Seth Tupper. Gentlemen, if you'd like to take an opportunity here to introduce yourselves, who you are, what you do, and we'll get going.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I'm Seth Tupper. I am a South Dakota native. I was raised in Westman Springs and Kimball, South Dakota, two very, very tiny towns. Went to South Dakota State University, got a journalism degree, progressed into jobs working in newspapers in Worthington, Minnesota, and then Mitchell, South Dakota, and then the Rapid City Journal. And I'm sure we'll get into this later, but as I sort of witnessed the decline of the corporate newspaper world and experienced that, made the decision in early 2020 to jump over to South Dakota Public Broadcasting, worked as a journalist there, and went through the pandemic there, which was interesting. And then in 2022, I got the opportunity to join State's Newsroom, which is a national nonprofit, which has stood up state-focused newsrooms in 38 states around the country, and they were launching one in South Dakota and looking for an editor. So I applied for and got that job in 2022 and helped launch our website and hired our staff. And so today, many of you may be familiar with us, but we're a staff of four, and we produce news and commentary on a daily basis on state-focused items in South Dakota. So state government, state politics, state policy, things that impact the state as a whole. And yeah, that's what we do. And I've kind of seen the entire run of media changes during my career. I often joke that I started at a newspaper with no website, and now I work at a website with no newspaper. So anyway, that's kind of the quick version of my story. I do have to say hello. It was funny watching people's names pop up on here. My old fraternity house mother, Deb Debates, I see is on the call from SDSU, and also Del Lanowski, my former SDSU government professor, is with us today too, and probably a lot of other people I know. But those are a couple names I saw pop up. So.
Yeah, that's great. I'll also say welcome to several people I know on there as well. My name is Carson Walker. I am CEO of South Dakota News Watch. We are an organization. We've been around since I started publishing in 2017. I came on in 2023 as the first CEO. My background goes back actually to radio and television. I worked in both of those before going to the Argus Leader for a number of years. And then most of my career was at the Associated Press, both here in South Dakota and then also at the National Filing Desk in Phoenix for 4 years, and then transferred back to South Dakota. I left journalism for a little bit to work at USD and Sanford Health, actually in PR and communications roles, and that really gave me a good perspective of, looking back at the media and just seeing some of the changes. And when I had the opportunity to get back into it, it's daunting because of the challenges we're going through right now. But I really still feel that it is a calling, and we're trying to figure out where it's going and continually adjust. And we are a nonprofit. We support or get all of our support largely from individual and foundations. And I've got a board that really gives me a lot of latitude in what we do. And I think one of the nice things about, I know from Seth's standpoint is we've got a lot of, I can come up with an idea and we can adapt. And I think that's some of what I would say, regarding today's conversation is that never have I seen us have to evolve so quickly because, I spent most of my career, very little change in the traditional media. Whereas now trying to reach an audience that's changing, that's tuning out to the news, that's really a big part of what we do. It's not just reporting, but it's trying to figure out what platforms, where are they going into. We go into more in depth. I have started doing fact briefs because they fall in line really with our mission to really shed light on issues. We try to complement what Seth and the other news organizations do in the state by doing more in depth. I want us to get more even investigative work done. I have a staff of I'm bringing on another reporter still to be myself, and then 3 reporters here in September. Across the state, one in Rapid City, Sioux Falls, and then in Pierre as well there. So trying to diversify our staff and what we cover and to adjust to what people find interesting.
Thank you for those perfect introductions, because I think they give us a broad perspective of what it is you do, and that you have a pretty strong understanding of what we're facing in terms of the decline in trust and in the media and in all of our institutions. So let's start with the basics, because we got a lot to unpack. So what is information literacy?
Well, I guess I would define it as, being able to find and evaluate information that you need for whatever project it is that you're working on, but knowing where to find it, how to evaluate it, and how to use it in, for example, in our world, whatever type of writing that you're working on, et cetera. I'm sure we'll get into more of this later. I think, obviously there's a lot of our world is lacking in information literacy right now. I think we have information overload, and there's an abundance of information, obviously, that's available to everyone. But the information literacy of knowing how to evaluate that information and consider where it's coming from and how it could be used responsibly and irresponsibly, I think, we're lacking in a lot of that right now, obviously.
And
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carson.
No, that's well put, and I think he hit on something. Information overload. I reference a study. I think it was a Pew or a Pointer, that it is that the large amount of information is one of the reasons that people it is actually increasing their distrust in the media, because of there's just so much of it that they, it used to be in the old days. Again, it was pretty simple. You had, everybody got a newspaper, maybe a weekly paper, a daily paper. You had a few TV channels available to you, a few radio, and it was in that simplicity. I think it was easier for people to stay informed and to take in information. One of the things I just came across this, and I was thinking about this presentation, but Eddie Bauer, the clothing manufacturer, has just changed its logo because people can't read cursive. Gen Z can't read cursive, and so they had to go to block letters. And it's just kind of almost symbolic of where we find ourselves, is that now we have this ubiquity of information that's available, but some of those very basic ways of even learning the English language in a different style have gone away by the wayside. So yeah, I think it's and also the younger generation is also shunning books, that they're too, that it's just too much for the way that they're learning or whatever it is. And so there's that gap in that. And I think information literacy, a lot of that comes from reading. Yeah, to be a good writer, you just read good writing or somebody else's work, and you're automatically going. So there's almost like a loss of that input that we all probably grew up on this call.
It's funny that you said that about the Eddie Bauer script, because I ran across, my daughter is in her 30s, and she came across something and sent it to me that says that I could read ancient text because I know how to read cursive. But part of what you alluded to there too is, is reflective in our literacy rates, our declining literacy rates in general, throughout the United States, but in South Dakota as well. So how is information literacy then correlated with media literacy?
Well, I think very similarly, another skill that's been largely lost, and maybe because you didn't have to have it as much, in previous times, is knowing where to find media that are relevant to your life, knowing how to evaluate the mission of that media outlet, and whether what they're trying to do, whether they're trying to be fair, objective, and unbiased, whether they're trying to present a certain viewpoint. Um, Researching and evaluating, what type of media is this? As Carson and I both work in the nonprofit news sector now, but there are, newspapers that are corporately owned by publicly traded companies. There are startups that are owned by just a couple people. There are all kinds of ways that media can be owned and operated these days. There's public media, of course. And, I think media literacy is having an awareness of all those different kinds of things, and knowing how to find, news. And then of course, when you're using media literacy, you also need to engage your information literacy, as you found a trustworthy news source, but you're reading or you're consuming what they're putting out. You're evaluating the information that's in their reporting, and is this trustworthy information, et cetera. But I think that's a big issue in society today. I hear from a lot of people, and I feel it myself, that a lot of us are used to a decade or two ago, when we maybe got a local newspaper, and maybe we got a regional or national newspaper, and we listened to a certain TV news, or we watched a certain TV news outlet, and we just knew where to get information. And the newspaper that came to us every day was curated with information from local, state, national, and world sources, and it was all there for you every day. Now, it feels like you've got to find, a lot of people tell me this, you got to find 12 different sources of news to get everything that you need or want for your local news, your national news, your sports, your, obituaries, all these things that used to be all curated in one place are no longer there for you. And that makes it really difficult, because you're out just sort of searching for this stuff, and information is coming to you, and maybe you don't know where it comes from, and maybe you don't know where this outlet, this particular media outlet, what its background is, what its ownership is, what its editorial stance is, et cetera. So it's become a very confusing media environment. I think, a lot of people are lacking in media literacy, but a lot of it is, again, this fire hose of things that are coming at them all the time. It's very hard to be media literate in today's world.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really well put, Sal. I think they are intertwined very tightly. That and I think some of it is, I think of the civics impact of things as well. That people, my guess is a lot of people are tuning out the news because of they're overwhelmed, but also we've kind of gotten away from people understanding the connection between why they should be informed as part of their civic duty and responsibility. That is kind of that core thing with voting, with being able to, to take part in society. They're kind of checking out, and information and media is a part of that checking out, the act of that they don't feel empowered. And so therefore there's not a need to inform themselves of what's going on there. And I think a lot of folks are listening to, cable news now. 30% of Americans, this is a survey from a few years ago, 30%, their primary source is cable television. And so the intimacy of reading a book or reading a paper, or, engaging with a longer form article, the likes of which that Seth and I create, it does take a little bit of work. I mean, you've got to, it's an intentional thing to inform yourself, instead of just reading a headline or listening to a politician or somebody else on how to vote or what to think. It's really, being literate is an active, you need to be engaged with whatever you are there. So I think that we've kind of gotten away from that being something that people are purposeful about. And I think that's kind of where we find ourselves with people ill-informed, and a lot of criticism that we get is people see the headline and they don't read the whole story. So there's not full context of what we're saying in there, that there's going to be a little bit of everything in there, good, bad, and ugly. You might not agree with it all, but you're going to get informed. And your feelings aren't the first thing that you should go to on whether you read something. Some of this is going to be difficult, but you're informed at the end, and then you can make a decision.
Exactly. And I think too, what you touched on there too, um, Carson, is the piece about being an informed citizenry. How we're drifting away from the literacy so much that we're not as informed as we need to be. And so that then ties into the piece about the decline of trust in our institutions, and media is just one of them. Over, I think this is the fourth consecutive year that it's been sub 30% averages in all of our country's institutions. The waning trust in our institutions is sad and pretty disturbing when you think about it. Actually, just this month in July, there was a near record low of 28% of trust in of trust. 28% of people actually trust our institutions. That's problematic and definitely troubling, because they've been tracking this since 1979, and now this year we're at almost an all-time low. So and that's from a Gallup poll. I don't have the link, but I can, if you'd like it, I can look it up for you. But so it's been declining over the past several decades, significantly over the last few years. But I think one of the things you touched on, there's a lot of factors exacerbating this trend, right? But I think for me, the one that jumps out is what you said exactly, Seth, about information overload. But what other things have exacerbated, excuse me, this trend, especially in terms of the media?
Well, that's a long story. And I looked at it through the lens of my own experience, and probably an experience that we all share. But decades ago, as I mentioned earlier, you maybe got your local paper and a regional or national paper, and you listened to Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, on TV every night, and we all shared sort of the same reality. Lots of people maybe disagreed, but we were all getting the same basic feed of information, and maybe your sources varied a little bit, but they're all very, very similar. And there is some blame for the media, in this, over the decades, as in my experience, as newspapers were, started as family businesses, and they got bought up by large corporations, and there was massive consolidation in the news business. uh, and these corporations started to lay off local journalists and things, and cut costs and cut pages and cut editions as financial times got tough. That caused some people to lose, trust and faith that the people who owned their local paper were actually looking out for their local community. And there was a disconnect that started to grow and grow and grow and grow there, until we get to the point now where so many, unfortunately, so many local newspapers, especially the corporately owned ones, are just, a shell of their former self, that aren't really anywhere near the community institutions that they were formerly. So, that's part of it. And then of course you add in, the onset of the internet, social media, smartphones, and all these things. I think a lot about the opinion pages of newspapers. And when I was at the newspaper in Mitchell, my old boss, Noel Hamill, took a lot of pride in making the opinion page a public square. And we had opposing viewpoints, national columnists, local columnists, letters to the editor, cartoon, editorial cartoons. And, we vetted these things, and you could send, the local crank who had a conspiracy theory could send in a letter to the editor. But if it didn't check out, or they didn't want to put their name to it, we weren't going to publish it. And so there was no way for that to really get out into the world. Now that person can post whatever they want on social media, and it can be viewed by hundreds of thousands of people in one day, if it goes viral. And so, you could make an argument that, there's been a lot of great advances in access to information, but obviously that has really come along with some very negative things too in the quality of information. So I'll stop there. It's a long story with a lot of other things, but that's where my thoughts go when I think about stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one thing that Seth and I was talking, he's a little bit younger than me, but I read an article that our generation is really the last one that really had a lot of traditional ethics taught in journalism school and in the newsrooms, that we had high standards and the things that are allowed. And a lot of the distrust, I think, in media is self-inflicted. It's caused by a lot of organizations being more entertainment than they are really truly journalism in nature there. And that goes back to cable television is entertaining, but it shouldn't be a person's only news diet. You got to have a variety of information there. I would actually go back even in a presentation I give. I talk a little bit about the fairness doctrine, and that ended in 1987. They withdrew the fairness doctrine, which required broadcasters to cover a variety, issues of interest, but do so in a way that is balanced to everybody. That used to be a part of the way that television and radio were done, especially because of the FCC license. And I think in getting away from that, you've seen media get more polarized in kind of picking a line. The Telecommunications Act of 96 was another blow that allowed some of the consolidation that Seth talked about there in terms of the broadcaster. And so over the past generation of people that have come up, they've been able to kind of come up with what are you, left, right? What are you going to be as a journalist? And traditionally, that wasn't the case. We really tried to tweak everybody's nose equally and are very committed to that, in terms of trying to be independent and pursue all sides aggressively. And I think our standards have gotten watered down a little bit to where that is no longer assumed with a lot of news organizations. And I think quite honestly, it makes some of us who are really committed to that, it makes it more difficult to do our job. Because people are, and again, I'm like going, there's a lot of bad preachers, a lot of bad politicians, a lot of bad business people. We don't throw all of them out, but with the media, for whatever reason, there's kind of like we're called the media in a pejorative way, and I guess it's kind of discouraging because individually I am different than a lot of what you see. Seth has high standards. I'd like to be, judged on my, byline and my work and organization from that standpoint. So I think that those are just a couple of thoughts I think that I've seen in the evolution of it.
I would add on the ethics thing real quick. I chuckle because when people ask me what I do for a living and I tell them I'm a journalist, oftentimes these days the first question after that is, what side are you on? Or what's your, which are you left or right leaning? Or what?
Yeah.
And it's just assumed that I'll say one or the other or whatever.
Exactly.
It never used to be that way, but now often people, what do you do for a living? I'm a journalist. That's the very next question that I get.
Yeah. I'm a child of the Walter Cronkite years, so I'm just nodding my head, going, "I know exactly what you're talking about." Yes, we're going to dive into the impacts of the digital age. We're going to talk about the impact of social media, but I wanted to take a moment here. There's a question in the chat. If are you allowed to ask questions? Absolutely. I should have said that at the top, and I apologize. This is an interactive program, so if you have if you have a question or a comment, anything you want to add, either, raise your hand, drop it in the chat. I could read it out loud if you don't want to raise your hand. Ben, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stacy, and thanks for having this forum. I'm relatively new to the area, so it's nice to see you all. I am trying to understand as a younger person. I've heard a few things that I haven't heard before, and I'd like to ask you if I'm hearing correctly. I heard you say something, Carson, shunning books. And for me, when I was young, I would typically do what my parents were doing. And this isn't to place blame on somebody who's older than me, but if they told me go read, you need to do it for school, and they watch TV, well, I want to watch TV as well. And so that goes into informational literacy and trust and media literacy. Something that I've been thinking about as you all have been speaking is, isn't having multiple sources part of having a healthy democracy? And literacy, therefore, what does that actually mean to be literate at that level? And if it has to do with trust, to me, when I develop trust with one of you all, it's more about sharing what's vulnerable to me. And so if something is exclusive or aggressive, does that mean that we don't have enough spaces where other people are being heard? And if you're not being heard, then you just say things that are completely exclusive of the other side. The left is bad, the right is bad, because I'm not heard by them anyways. So I might as well shut them off completely. But when it gets to informational literacy, I haven't heard of that much. So I guess one is a question or a comment on what shunning books really looks like. Is that a product of the environment that we're born into? And then going into informational literacy. This seems like an interesting idea to me because, in my eyes, having multiple outlets is a positive thing. Having these opinion pieces that Seth mentioned, this is how we develop trust. But if we need to vet them, if we need to filter out what is being shared, are we also filtering out trust with that? You know, so there's a lot of things that I'm thinking about as we start to get into informational literacy and what it means to be a journalist and work in a healthy democracy. As I, as a young person, and us as a society and a culture begin to develop these interactions.
Yeah,
Good question.
I agree that the home is the place that is the best place to start. My media diet is, I grew up, I was blessed because my parents, we had a variety of sources and we read. It was just assumed, and I think you're right. I think we as parents have a lot to do with our children's literacy as it comes to books, but also their trust in the media. They, people are, they're listening to their parents and they're hearing that you can't trust anybody. As far as the multiple sources, I don't know if this answers it, but I am intentional about seeking out, conservative, liberal, and those sources in the middle, because I'm amazed at how, and I would say this too, in defense of a lot of what we do, every one of you on the call is going to take away something different from what Seth and I say today. And that's just the way we, interpret things. We have different priorities. And so I think in doing that, like you are getting a variety of perspectives, you're getting those individual reporters and news organizations' perspectives, which I think overall adds to your literacy because you get a sense for what maybe is the truth. If you watched the coverage of the same story on 3 different news outlets, you take away something different from each one and collectively have a pretty good idea about what happened there. And so I think that is, and that gets back to not just listening to, one source, but being astute enough to be able to say, I like that writer, I like that organization. That builds your trust, your ability to, I think, learn and discern. And you're going to come to trust maybe even people who don't agree with you, but they do a good job of covering that angle, from that end. I hope I answer your question there from that standpoint. That's just some thoughts I guess I had.
Well, and Ben, to expand on that a little bit, I think that's when I was listening to you speak, Ben, I'm going to take it absolutely. But isn't that where informational literacy kind of comes into play in being able to discern or learn to verify from multiple sources? I mean, having multiple sources is a good thing. The informational literacy piece then comes into play, right? With being able to critically think about those pieces that you're getting from all different directions and determine which one or ones are verifiable. Is that kind of also the link between informational literacy and media literacy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think multiple sources of information are fantastic, but only if you know the quality of those sources and if you're able to judge, what you're getting from those sources. I mean, if you regularly consume 12 news sources a day and they're all just feeding you propaganda straight from one particular political party, well, then having lots of sources isn't really serving you very well, obviously. But if you have multiple sources of information, as Carson said, and you're able to judge and determine, okay, I recognize that this source over here is connected to one side of the political aisle or the other and is sort of feeding me that viewpoint, fine. And I recognize that this one over here is a little different. I recognize that this one is trying to stay down the middle. And if you have the informational literacy and the media literacy, then I think yes, multiple sources are great. But I think one of the great problems we have in society today is that so many people just are imbibing their social media feed and there's just information just washing over them 24/7, and they're just swallowing it down, and some of it, and they don't know where it's coming from or whether it's trustworthy or not, and they're just consuming it and moving on to the next thing. And the book thing made me chuckle. I have 2 kids, 18 and 15, and my 15-year-old was assigned for a class over the summer to read a book. Okay. And and we're all a product of our environment. And I saw that with my kids. I mean, when I was a kid, we had 3 broadcast TV stations, and an Atari. We were really living it up with an Atari with like
Right.
two cartridges, and books, magazines, papers. That was it. And I think one thing's the proliferation of media and social media and TikTok and YouTube and everything has shortened our attention spans. So it is harder to get kids to read because there's so many other things competing for their attention, and not all bad things, but yeah, it's funny to watch my son. He's super into computers and coding and music and all these different things. And it's really hard to get him to sit down to read. But when we did, he sat down with this book and just devoured it, because it's like, hey, maybe you should try that more often, And so, yeah, it is a fight, and it's I think it can be really useful as a parent to do things to try to get to lengthen your kids' attention spans when everything else is fighting to shorten them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me to I wanted to dive into the impacts of the digital age, and primarily in terms of social media. We'll talk about social media first, and then AI, because I did see Tara's comment in the chat about AI, and we'll get into that. The first thing I wanted to kind of unpack is the impact of social media on both MIL, media and information literacy, and in the trust in our institutions. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's both good and bad, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of good there. And I think, when we talk about social media, I'm just amazed at how some of the algorithm really does give you what you want.
Yep.
If you're looking at, if we follow a particular path, you're going to get fed that same thing, which again, social media there's a lot of good, there's a lot of interesting out there, but I find myself, those are scrolling and reading headlines is not really, I don't even really consider it. You're getting some literacy, but it's not the type of, it's not in depth, and it is being fed whatever you're telling it to give you, instead of being that intentional about going to different specific news sites or other information sites and being intentional about looking at the source to make sure, yeah, this is something that I can trust. Whereas just being it sent to you. I followed a news app recently. I tested it out, and I was kind of horrified, actually, because all of the stories were really clickbait, and there was not, and it wasn't very intellectual at all. And I found myself being really agitated versus what my normal feed is which I'm very purposeful about what I follow. And so I just saw, even just in reaction, just from that, just following social only, or that feed, versus the intentional habit that I have from that standpoint. But again, and Seth mentioned earlier, it's going to that about section of a source. It's looking at their ethics, their standards. It's looking at, their funding, and trying to determine, oh yeah, this is a trustworthy source, versus something that is just, I can't believe the number of people, I love them, but over the last 10 years of sending these impassioned people with, who just took their phone out, and it's like, I heard this, and they place all this credibility in this person with no credibility at all. And so we're not stopping and thinking about the source of the information enough. And I think that's some of what social media has done.
Carson, can you clarify one thing that'll come up with the social media discussion and the AI discussion is the algorithm that you mentioned. What is for those not necessarily clearly versed, what is an algorithm or algorithmic bias?
It basically, if I look at either all conservative or all liberal, for example, content, and follow either of those, that on most social media feeds using an algorithm in the background, that's the content that it will send me. Mm-hmm. Versus what I'm saying is we have to manually look for a variety. And you can create, I think, a feed of followers, that do that. But if you're not intentional, like, especially like I just became a grandfather last year. And so I found myself, I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram, but sometimes I must have looked at a baby video, and then I have all these there's some incredibly funny videos with these new parents out there, and it's like skiing, and it's baby videos now in the feed there. And it was just amazing how quickly it kind of took over the feed of that. And that's kind of what the algorithm does.
It's kind of like, I think about like if you go on Amazon and you look for socks,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden your feed is like, or like another shopping, Temu, for example. If you go in and you look for socks and you click on the socks and oh, those are cute. And then you go back out and then all of a sudden all you have in here's what's recommended for you. There's like 40 different kinds of socks.
Yeah.
So and so that's a big piece of both social media and AI.
Well, I was going to say, I think, and that's the insidious part of social media is I think we all recognize when, oh, I was just shopping for socks and now my feed is showing me all these sock things. But a lot of people don't recognize it with news and they're just seeing the news feed. And just a quick story from an insider perspective on this, how my eyes have been open to how people are controlled by their social media feed. In State's newsroom, part of our budget is we all get $50 a month to boost a story on Facebook. Okay. So with that, you pay Facebook $50 and it does whatever it does in the background to show that to more people. You might put a story up and it'll get viewed by a few hundred people and 10 of them will comment on it or whatever. And the rest of the world will go unaware that story even exists. But for $50, I can bring in thousands upon thousands of people who will then engage in impassioned arguments about this story from God knows where they're at in the world, who never would have even seen it. And to watch that in the background, the amount of control that social media has over what you are seeing has been absolutely incredible to see from behind the scenes. And I don't think there's a lot of awareness of that. People are engaging with these stories that the algorithm or somebody has boosted into their feed, and I think they just came across it naturally. And they might get caught up their entire day or week being mad at somebody who commented on it and they're responding, whatever, all because they're being manipulated to have seen it in the first place. It's really an amazing thing to witness. And I think we all need to be more aware of that.
Well, and its impact too on just its ability to create an echo chamber. Where it's just going to keep feeding you exactly what you already think. And it just reinforces, even if it's misinformation, it's still just going to reinforce what you already think. There's a question or comment in the chat from Mary. She says, verifying the credibility of the source is crucial to getting an accurate picture of news. I'm constantly astonished by how much consumers share non-credible news. As Carson and Seth said, we should spend some time finding out background on the sources they share. And that is exactly informational literacy. Thinking critically about what you're going to get inundated with all kinds of whatever, misinformation. Anybody can say anything they want on social media. So Mary's point, I think, is spot on. So does anybody else have a question? Anybody want to raise their hand or toss another question in the chat? Otherwise, we're going to move into AI because I know that's what Tara wanted to know about too. Tara had a question in the chat way back. It says, does AI factor into that lack of trust and factual information coming in? And my first question I wanted to know, or wanted you gentlemen to clarify, because I know you know this. What is a deep fake? I hear it all the time, but nobody ever says what's a deep fake.
Well, we had a great example of it a couple of legislative sessions ago when they were trying to legislate on deep fakes and AI. And I think it was a Democratic legislator who brought the bill, came in and had asked an AI program to produce an audio piece of, I think it was Donald Trump's voice saying something that she wanted him to say. And she brought it in and played it for the committee. And it was incredibly convincing. It sounded exactly like him. You could understand that the words he was saying weren't something he probably would have said, but it was his voice. It sure sounded like it. And in the political realm, that's a deep fake where, maybe you get this has happened elsewhere in the country where you get a robocall and you pick it up and, oh, Joe Biden is telling me not to actually go out and vote today. And that's his voice. Well, that's a deep fake. And, or pictures, oh my gosh, here's a picture of somebody doing something terrible. Looks really realistic. There they are. Could be a deep fake. And I'm sure we'll get into that more, but that's, when I think about AI and news, those are the scary things for me.
And isn't that probably the biggest most troubling piece of AI now? Is that how do you critically think about something, or really look into the sources of your information when AI can create stuff like that, deep fakes? Or how do you verify? How do you do that?
We don't know yet, really. I don't think that's
Good.
true.
Good. I was a little
We-
worried that I was missing something. Okay, good.
with media literacy and information literacy and us as journalists, I mean, healthy skepticism is obviously really important. We have had those discussions internally that, we're now in a time and an era where if somebody sends us a photo as part of a news tip, we can't automatically assume that that is a legitimate photo. We have to question pretty much everything. Number one, is this an actual photo? Is this an AI generated photo? Is it a doctor photo? Whatever. Voices, recordings, same thing. First thing we have to ask ourselves is, somebody sends us an explosive recording of a newsworthy thing. Is this real? And using the sources we have as journalists and reporters to try to track things down and question people and verify information to determine if something's real before we just accept that it's real. And that's, something that is just an extra burden and scary, but it's just the world we live in now.
Would you say then that what Ben brought up earlier about having multiple pieces or multiple sources of information, that's the way you're going to combat the possibility of deep fakes and the AI, skewing the data, so to speak, is having multiple sources of information?
Yes, I would say that, because, and again, this isn't just me promoting our news organizations, but it is, because our standards, we have our best practices in the footer of our website. And what I would say to people is that, if you're just getting off of social media, it is probably fake in today's world, with that. If it's too good to believe, if it's, too out there to believe, it probably is a good indication that it's fake. And so I think that comes back to our standards of basically saying we don't use AI in creating stories, number one, and that there is a smart human being who has vetted the information, that when what we're reporting has, we might refer to AI something there, but like Seth said, we will check the veracity of it. And when you are getting your news about that from multiple different sides, there is a bit of a check and balance there, because if something is written that is clearly, from something fake, the way the media work is there'll be another legitimate news organization out there that will check that, or serve as a bit of a balance on that. And I think that's one way that people can really lower their distrust, is by still sticking with the human being doing it, and that organization whose standards require that level of verification. And I think one of the concerning things is more news organizations are getting away from that. In the interest of saving money, they are having AI bots write stories, and again, I was at the Associated Press 20 years ago when they started doing briefs from box scores. That's one thing, and that's pretty accurate. You can get a pretty good, summation of a game. But as it evolves, I think the concern should be is that those bots are writing those higher level stories that are going to be more influenced, and there's not a human checking the veracity of that story. That's where we come in.
I think when I was contemplating this whole thing, I thought about not so long ago, actually, back when I was in after I got out of graduate school, the big, and I worked at the high school, the big emphasis on don't trust Wikipedia to be a legitimate source, for a paper or whatever, because it can be anybody's opinion. It doesn't have to be, concrete. It doesn't have to be proven or anything. And now, 20 something years later, look where we're at with AI, where there's no human involved at all. So,
right. Well, and
Dell has go ahead. Sorry, Carson.
I could just, not to interrupt you there, but and I think that actually illustrates it really well. I like Wikipedia to identify the links to the sources that might be legitimate. And so that's, one way, I guess, that yes, on its surface, I don't trust it, right? But a lot of times that is a good gathering place for legitimate sources. And so it is another place. But there again, that's that informational literacy, I think, that we're talking about, that it's like, no, I'm not going to just trust what Gemini gave me as a summation, but are there links in there, or is there reference material that actually is a legitimate source that I, as a human, can go and vet and use as a source.
Dell has a comment in the chat. It says, Ben had some interesting ideas, particularly about generational attitudes. Any ideas on how K-12 through college we can teach students to evaluate their sources? And Mary echoes that sentiment with some instruction in schools on how to spot fake media would also help. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think we need more of that. One of the hard things is with AI and changing so rapidly in things, it's, developing curriculum and developing courses. Obviously you're in danger of things being outdated a week after you develop them, in the era we're in, unfortunately. And I do know, with my kids, I did see some of that as they were taking courses where they were required to write papers. There was some instruction on evaluating sources. And but yeah, I completely agree that we need to be thinking about that. And of course, we're in a very tricky environment with that, because if you start talking about media literacy and information literacy in schools, it quickly trips into a political argument about one person's idea of media literacy is everybody should be watching Fox News, or whatever, and nothing else. And somebody else has a very different idea. So that's another troubling aspect of it, is how politicized something like that can become so quickly, and who's writing the curriculum and how is that being influenced, I go back to starting at home, so that is so much of that is so important, is trying to teach your own kids a good, healthy media diet and encouraging that.
I think what you said about the political polarization piece, when I was looking at the trends in why people have lost trust in our America's institutions, political polarization was one of the big ones, along with during the pandemic, the inconsistent health information being disseminated, the spread of misinformation and things like that. So it's interesting that you brought that up, Seth. There's another question here from Ryan in the chat. Can you talk about how the addition of comment sections to news websites changed the industry? To me, that always seemed like it was a turning point. And then Deb also adds, and the influence of parents who only follow one source for their news. So I guess that's two separate questions, but.
On the comment section, I had the experience of being at newspapers when they turned comments on and when they turned them off. And it was a lot of arguments and hand wringing about, should we do this, should we not, and peer pressure. Everybody else has comments on their website. Should we? We don't have them on ours. But yeah, there's a lot of turning points. I could look back in my career in the newspaper business about different things. But it was the comment section and was almost sort of like an early social media, or a precursor of what we're seeing now on Facebook and Twitter, where people would go in there and just start ravaging each other in the comments section, and newspapers started having to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to police those comment sections to remove things that were untrue or expletives and profanity and all that stuff, and that drove a lot of newspapers to then try to put the toothpaste back in the tube and shut down their comment section. And then that angered people because they wanted the comment section, and that caused more distrust in media institutions. So yeah, it's one of many things that I think we stumbled over in the newspaper business, not understanding in the moment how this would affect media going forward.
You have thoughts on that, Carson?
I would just say too, going back to the second question there about that, again, that does come back, I think, in really teaching those parents, if we can change what has gone on and really challenge people to do a better job of teaching. Sorry, I got a mower right outside me. It's a beautiful day and he decides to mow right by me here. But I think that's a kind of a part of it. Just let's raise the standards of literacy and just get away from the idea that it's okay to just be biased. And I think that, it was discouraging, I think, in 2016 when you heard family members not talking to each other because there was this Hillary and Trump break. And it just grieves my heart to hear that, because it's like we've gotten to the point where, that's now the norm in a lot of families. And so I think culturally, we in the media, I think, can do a better job of trying to educate people. And that's, I think, hopefully we'll get to that point where it's just the norm is skepticism, critical thinking, and really being responsible for our own opinion and not just listening.
Todd, go ahead. I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
No problem. First of all, Seth, I was at the Journal. I was the online editor when they flipped the comments on. 1,500 a day.
Oh my gosh.
And that was just at the beginning. It was wicked. But anyway, that's not really my question. But when you said that, I said, oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, I worked 25 years in newspapers. I've been 15 years now in the private. One of the things that I noticed when I came into private, I worked with some journalists. 3 of other people where I was came from the Journal. They've all left. And what I've noticed mostly is that most people don't ask those questions. You talk about how you question sources and how, to get a breadth. But most people, particularly because of where they are, you spoke about this really good. Social media tends to, and it's by its nature, you identify. It's like an identification thing. And so you're kind of going with the side a lot of times by the nature of the tool. And so the information gets lost there, or you become part of like a team versus trying to sort things out. As news organizations now, in this climate, because AI the wave is here and it's running. It's not like it's going to go back at this point. Even your emails have AI breakdowns when they come in. So it's there. How do media organizations help in that world of education? School is one thing, but media organizations are going to be at the front of it if they're going to be successful. How do you get people to basically take that journal, the thing that you've learned, to question everything, even yourself? How do you get that into people's thought processes while you're also reporting on, information?
Excellent
Important
question,
information.
Todd.
The kind of information you can only provide.
Seth?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess we are starting to, and I think we're going to see more on News Watch, explain what the reporting process is, something that more news organizations are starting to do. And especially on investigations, we've done this once or twice now, where this is a situation with the writer, and explain that and basically peel back the curtain in terms of letting people know, here's everything that we did to verify this information. And the act of doing that will hopefully, that people will see, oh, they were not willy-nilly, that they did this. We list our sources. If you look at our fact briefs, one of the comments that people are saying that they like about it is literally listing of the sources of information, that we give 150-word summary and then list that down. And I think that's a technique that I'm going to do more of, because it basically says we're showing our homework as much as we can. You still have to do it. But the lucidity that is in a part of what we do now is actually really good. And it's probably one of the ways that maybe we can counteract that and is overdue.
I have to admit, Carson, every time I get one of your news briefs, I actually have a file in my inbox to just slide it over there in case I ever have a question about that. So yeah. I think that we know we're running out of time, but I think that MIL, media and information literacy, is obviously crucial to regaining trust in our institutions. So how, as we as individual consumers, how can we improve our MIL and out of those around us, of our society, of our children, of those that we acquaint with every day? How do we improve that?
Well, I think, if you're on this call, you probably have a pretty good media diet and things already, and you're concerned about this and you're thinking about it. But I do think, I talk about this with my wife a lot. I think in this age, Carson alluded to it earlier, how we're divided as families and friends along political lines and things. It's being brave enough and civil enough when somebody shows you did you see this? Shows you their phone, it's just some random thing that popped up, having the wherewithal and the bravery to say, where does that come from? Do you know? Oh, it's this website. Oh, I wonder, what is that website? And who funds it? Is it, where is it based? Who owns it? And just, I I think that's one thing we can do as people who are thinking about this, is the acquaintances and people you have in your life who may be open to that kind of thing, is just, gently challenging people on, when you hear them bring something like that up, is where did you hear that? And do you know that it's trustworthy? Is it credible? What do you know about that source? Is it, and just to try to, I guess, spark that, give that spark for people to try to think in that same way.
That's really well put, Seth. I agree with that. I think that you have a lot of influence over the people in your life. And I think that the more we, and again, not, we get a lot of criticism and get called horrible names. I mean, I was in church a couple of years ago, and there was even a pastor that questioned, it was kind of like, don't follow the media, or don't believe the media. There's just general idea that somehow, first of all, my chosen craft, you've chosen to do my life, is somehow, a meaningless profession, and that there's no place for the, legitimate media in society. But without it, those ideas are allowed to run rampant. And so there is a check. We are built with a brain and the ability to analyze and determine whether something is trustworthy. And I would just say, with the people around us, lovingly get people to say, let's just think about the other side. I wonder if there's another side to this story there. And it really is that. I think that, and really not paying attention to those sites, and not giving weight to people who want to diminish the role of independent thought, because that's, I think, what you see a lot of times with leadership in the political realm.
And I think one thing that rings true for me, that I picked up on a long time ago, someone pointed out to me, is that it's important to understand how media operates, right? Because some media, not all media is created equal, so to speak. Some are opinion based. Some prefer a priority on factual reporting, but there's the underlying. It seems like almost all media outlets have some level of bias, whether it's intentional or unintentional. It seems that way. And so I guess it's just understanding. It's important for us to understand that, not all media is created equal. So you really do got to suss out, kind of what everything you guys have told us. We just need to soak that up and adopt those practices. Todd, did you have another question? Oh, okay.
Well, I would just say,
go ahead. Sorry, Carson, I was reading the chat.
I would just say too, that we're human. And I referenced that earlier, is that, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
People will cut slack to a lot of folks in society, but everything that Seth and I do, this is a specific bias. Well, maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe there's something that you're missing there, and it wasn't intentional. It wasn't, there. That's, again, the genius of going to multiple sources, different perspectives, because we're human.
And
I think that's a perfect summarization. Go ahead, Seth.
When people talk about bias, I always go to fairness. And I say, when you're evaluating a news source, and you think they're coming from a certain perspective, well, look, did they go and talk to the other side? Did they do everything they could to be fair? If there's a story that's critical of a certain piece of legislation or a certain politician or whatever, did they go to that person? Did they make the effort? Did they try to be fair? Did they test their own biases by going to the other side and asking them? And that's an important thing. I think if you're consuming media that doesn't do that, then you got to wonder, okay, what am I really getting here?
Exactly. We are actually out of time. Unfortunately, I mean, I'd love to talk about this for another hour if we had the time, but I do want to thank everybody for joining us. Invite everybody. And next week, we're going to start right now. Humanities Cafe is on a bi-weekly basis, but revving up for the Festival of Books at the end of September. Beginning next week, we're going to go on a weekly basis, and we're going to start talking to authors that are going to be presenting at the Festival of Books. We're going to start with next week. Mary Annette Pember is going to come talk to us about her book called Medicine River. I've read it. It's fantastic. And she's talking about the issues brought about by historical trauma in Indian country. It's part memoir, part history. I mean, talk about a lesson in history. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. And I really hope you can all join us next Thursday, August 7th. In the meantime, it's lunchtime is over. So it's time for us to close the cafe for today. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Carson. We'll do our best to do you justice by doing our job on the media and information literacy side. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the sunshine, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.